sport to business. My name is Niall. I'm the Chief of Program with PepTalk, a company founded by Brogan, my guest on the show today. My background is in mental skills and sports psychology, and I've worked in Olympic and professional sport pretty much all over the world, mostly North America, a little bit in New Zealand and in Europe. And I returned home to Ireland about a year ago, and I've fallen into the company of Bernard Brogan. Bernard doesn't need much of an intro, but Bernard is a 7-time All-Ireland winner. He's an absolute legend of the sport, and also a legend of entrepreneurship. He's been involved in some really, really impressive startups, including Legacy, a marketing company that now probably the market leader in Ireland, and also PepTalk, a company that are changing the dial when it comes to employee well-being and understanding how well-being is a foundation pillar of high performance. Make sure to join this conversation online on Twitter at Business Show IRL, and be sure to use the hashtag Rebooting Ireland. Bernard, pleasure as always. One of the things I think is really interesting in the work I've done with athletes, and obviously the work you've done coming from a remarkable sporting career into a really, really strong business career, is what are the lessons you think you've picked up in your sporting life that have led to you being the leader and the success you are in the business world?
Yeah, it's a good question. I suppose I say two things. Two things really stand out to me from when I look at my sporting career and what I've learned from sport and how I've tried to bring that into my business world. First one being self-awareness. I think one of my biggest strengths in sport is understanding my strengths and understanding more so my weaknesses, and understanding that for a team to be successful, you need to have people with different skill sets and to complement each other. So I had loads of years where I was doing well and scoring loads of scores in Dublin's early days, but we weren't getting over the line. We weren't working as a cohesive team. We weren't working together in the right way. And Pat Gilroy put us under massive pressure, put me personally under a lot of abuse, I call it, but all from the right place. And I think that was a real lesson that'll stay with me for life. And in the business world, I know what my strengths are. I know where my weaknesses are. I'm a yellow personality for people who know personality tests. I'm quite creative. I'm quite personable. I want to be out there. I'm a salesperson. I'm an accountant by trade, but I'm actually terrible at attention to detail. So when I come into business, and my first, let's say, business is Legacy, me and James started. James is a solicitor, and we really complemented each other. As I said, was quite outgoing. I was quite ambitious. I was always thinking about ideas. And James was really attention to detail, really focused, would work all day long. And the two of us really complemented each other so we could actually get up and away as a business. That was one bit. And every kind of PepTalk, I suppose, where we work together, again, it was about building that team that has the different skill sets. When you're building technology, when you're building that type of stuff, you need to have the right skill set in the room. And that was something we had with Dublin. We had people who had different roles and different strengths. You had people like Philly McMahon who would take the head off a player. Great to have a Philly McMahon on your team, or James McCarthy who would go through a wall. Paul Flynn, who was just a Rolls Royce, just an engine and just would kick scores, and a couple of people inside who could finish the job and try and get the ball over the bar in the net. So self-awareness and understanding your strengths and weaknesses was number one. Secondly is it's about leadership and understanding the difference between management and leadership. So a manager, as Jim Gavin would say, is just to facilitate the execution for the people on the pitch. And leadership should be shown at all levels, through an organization or through a team. So Jim and manager Pat and even Pillar wanted to set up an environment where you could pull out those future leaders or leaders at all different levels across the organization, across the team. So when we were having a team meeting with Jim, he would actively promote a young Con O'Callaghan or an own Merchant to speak, to give their views, to share with the group their experience. Because I was there for 15 years. Stephen Cluxton is still there, nearly 20 years in. But every year there's a couple of new guys coming in, and that marrying of knowledge and different views on sport is so important. Do you know what I mean? So in the business world, it's about that. It's about how you create an environment where new people can become leaders or future leaders and can come up with innovation. They have a different viewpoint, they have a different outlook, they have a different probably experience in life than maybe the elder generation or the way we look at it. So those two things are two things that really stand out for me. And in everything that I do from a business point of view, I look at how do we manifest that? How are we building strength? Anytime you're hiring someone, anytime something's happened, how can you bring in a new skill set? How can you add to the team? Not just more of the same. How do you bring in someone with a different outlook? And then also, how do you set up an environment where people are empowered enough to get after and to show, I suppose, their best self and to help us as a team get to where we want to be.
And it's so true. I love your message there about leadership versus management. And there's some really brilliant research done by Owen Eastwood, who's a famous New Zealand sports psychologist. And he talks about the leadership of caring. And the kind of common misconception is that caring is something that, means that we all have to like toast marshmallows by the campfire thing and come by. But what he's really saying is that, you care enough about the people who work with you to actually be honest with them and have straight conversations and caring about, one of the things I think that's really important in this remote world, and it's something I know you speak really well about in your book, but it's the idea that, our personal lives and our professional lives are all intertwined now. The hybrid world of work is, everything has changed. It's the idea that you clock into work at 9 a.m. and you switch off everything else that's going on in your life and you just focus on work for 8 hours and then you switch off and go home and then deal with all the other stuff. That just doesn't exist anymore. And we have to adjust our working lives accordingly. And one of the things I love about the work that you guys did was the whole understanding that Jim had of family and vulnerability and connection. And he did this great thing with he used to talk about the performance trinity, and maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that and what that meant to you as a player and how that helped you develop.
Yeah, you're dead right. Like, I suppose PepTalk was founded on that philosophy that for high performance, people need to have balance throughout their whole lives. We all hear about work-life balance and all of these things. Last year in COVID has really shone a spotlight on the human capital of an organization and how important it is to look at the human as a whole, you know what I mean, and not just look at their skill set from a job point of view. And I suppose Jim really opened my eyes to that. And he had this thing called the performance trinity, and it's where he looked at the three most important things in each of our lives. Obviously, sport. We were there as athletes, as footballers. So that was one of them. Family lives at home was one, and then our work, or be a student. There's obviously a lot of students, people in different roles, but that is a big part of our lives, whether we like it or not. We have to work to live. Unfortunately, we weren't professional athletes, so we had to have a big part of our life was that we didn't tune off from that, which I did for my early days. I tuned out of my career and development and what I wanted to be when I'm older. All I cared about was Dublin football and wake up every morning thinking about it. I didn't give a hoot what education I had or what job I ended up in. But Jim, in fairness to him, really tried to bring that together, and something that I've tried to actively help with the group as well, about making them think about their career path as they go through sport. So as you say, the three things there. So you talk about sport. Obviously, we trained hard. We went through so many different layers of culture building that we'll chat through, I'm sure. The other bit was family. Never a Christmas went by that a card didn't come from Jim to the loved ones or family of the players. At Easter, an Easter egg went out. If there's a social event and a team building event, the family were there, kids, partners. And we were always kind of thinking about, God, we love a night on the beer with just the lads, like, as all old sports teams did, and we could act the fool. But the real reason behind that was that Jim wanted that environment at home to be positive around Dublin GAA. He felt that if I was coming home or one of the guys was coming home and their wife or kids were there, that they said, yeah, I have a positive affiliation with that group. I know Jim has the right motives. He's a lovely guy. They're a great setup. We're always included. I'm not going to give you stress about you training 3 times a week and not coming home till 11 o'clock and leaving at 6 a.m. on a Saturday morning, etc., etc. And that was the psychology behind it that I didn't think about at the time, but as you get older, you start to think about it. And the last bit was your career or your work life or your college life. If you had exams, Jim would tell you to go home from training, and we'll see you next week when your exams are over. If you need any help, we can organise some grinds. We can organise this. He He's actively trying to help people in their academics or in the business world. If I was traveling with PepTalk to the UK, you're on a plane, you're on a long journey up from Cork, or you're traveling around Ireland in the car, you put the feet up a train, you go do a light gym session or lift some weights. You don't go and slog on the pitch for injury prevention, number one, but also that we feel empowered and feel supported in our professional world. And the whole macro view of why he did that is he wants us to perform on the pitch on a Sunday in Croke Park. And for us to perform to our very best as individuals, whether in Croke Park or in the workplace, if those stresses around you are alleviated to the best of their ability, no one the silver bullet, nor the gym or any workplace, but if you're providing tools and supports for the individual in their personal life to help them set that up as best they can be, then you have that freedom to be the best you can be in your work or your sporting life. And that was his reason for that. And that's, I suppose, our fundamental why PepTalk and what we try and do in organizations is provide that outer human aspect of support and tools, so that when they come in to execute their skill, that they don't have these weighted stresses pulling them down, as so many of us have had over the last year, you know, and it has been a difficult time, you know.
And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because you mentioned there about culture, and you know, you come across it a lot in the corporate world where people talk about the culture of the organization and they don't really know what it means. And you have a lovely phrase that I've heard you use before about that culture lives and dies in middle management. And obviously, you know, I mean, from my perspective, with the work I've done with athletes in Olympic and pro sport, it was always about understanding relationships. And, you know, relationships and the ability to actually have a conversation with somebody is so important. And it really is at the heart of all culture. And if you have people who are upset in a company and they're not kind of, you know, they're not getting their way, or in the case of the Dublin football team, you know, you're not getting selected or whatever, if that festers behind the scenes, it just eats away at the morale. And eventually that will cause issues and fissures in relationships within the group. When you talk about culture living and dying in middle management, where's your perspective kind of in, we'll say, with legacy now, as opposed to when you were working with Dublin?
Yeah, I suppose the reason behind that saying, I suppose, is that we, as an organization, you can have the best senior management or a boardroom or the CEO can have the best vision of what he wants an organization to be. You can have the words on the wall behind them. You can have the values, the 4 or 5 values that they have in their handbook or their brand book. But fundamentally, culture is the living and breathing of the organization. It's how people interact with each other, the respect they have, how they interact with their customers, how they kind of walk the walk, how they kind of act as individuals as well. So when you say about middle managers, is that if the message of the organization isn't pushed down through middle managers, if you think about an organization, if a middle manager has 5 direct reports or 10 in their team, in essence, they are the kind of the leader of that group. So they dictate leave, they dictate happiness in your work, they dictate empowerment, they dictate how fulfilling your role is. So the organization can have the best will in the world about how they treat their people or how they walk the walk. But if that middle management isn't bought into that, really even more so than the boardroom, then what manifests itself is people below them having a different experience in the organization and not having the same fulfillment or purpose that the organization would like them to have. And that's something that I suppose every organization is struggling with over the last, and I like to think, I remember we met at the start of COVID, and I was thinking about the word culture because we bandied around a lot. And I kind of, in the sports pitch, when I mentioned culture, why we invest in culture, it is, as Mickey Whelan, the great Dublin legend, would say, it's money in the bank. Since culture is about putting money in the bank and putting positive capital in the bank around, so that when you come to a time of challenge, you have 5 minutes to go in a game, everyone's burnt out, everyone's knackered, you're 3 points down, you need to come up with the goods. That's when you pay out your culture. When Kev Mack comes on, gets a goal, when Mick McCauley gets fingertips to a ball, Eamon Fennell gets a big hand in and a throw up. All these big moments in games Dublin have had over the years is a cashing in of that culture They're only small. And people don't relate them to the early morning sessions or the team building or the few pints or good conversations, the feedback, fearsome feedback or that we have when you're trying to get to the high performance dynamic. That's what it's about. And I remember saying that to the team in Legacy. I said, they're like, what is this fella talking about? We're cashing in our culture now in COVID. I say they're like, this fella's lost his marbles now since the pandemic has came in. But I kind of came to an epiphany myself around that kind of. And it's easy in sport because we know there's always a time of challenge. There's 5 minutes to go. There's a minute to go. We're a goal behind. We see it, and that's why we love sport, because the unpredictability and the things that can happen at a turn of a bit of skill. The workplace, though, it's not as linear and not as kind of transparent to see. So I try to explain that in the team room, but I suppose what I was trying to say is that we all need to get behind the wheel, and we all do these great events. We try to build a positive culture, and we want everyone. And the reason we do that is so we support each other, and we were able to get through a time of challenge together, whatever that looks like, and that's what we tried to put together, as I'm sure most organizations are doing, at the time.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because you kind of, there's an element there of kind of how vulnerability is building trust, that if you're like willing to show yourself to be struggling at this moment, that other people will relate to that, and they'll actually, because we're all struggling, everybody's going through a tough time at the moment. So it's kind of, the idea that your leaders, your bosses kind of are in that same boat kind of takes you to a different kind of direction in your mindset when you think about how you're going to handle the struggles that are coming. And one of the things you guys did, I find this fascinating, but it's 2 weeks before the All-Ireland final, the 5 in a row All-Ireland final, and history is on the line, and this is something that's never been done before. And there's always that danger that you get so caught up in the idea of creating history that you kind of almost work harder trying to ensure that you win, so you're training harder. And a lot of teams who have failed at that kind of thing they get caught up in the history of it. But you guys did something completely different. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your trip to Lambay.
Yeah, it was just really interesting, and as I said there earlier, like we tried to build a positive culture and layer on certain behaviors, because you can't just turn this on overnight in a sports team or in a business. It has to be lived, and you have to live through experiences. Things like Pat Gilroy would have slept out under the sign in Arnott's for charity. I remember going busking with a bucket looking for some donations outside Copperface Jack's at 5 a.m. I'd say people didn't know what we were doing, trying to raise a few quid. I think a couple of lads went in, had a few pints, but we were fasting and staying overnight. Again, small little thing, but layering behaviours around. The reason that's done is about just trying to get after these different things, and things like charity, humility, the legacy of the group. I remember Jim brought us together in 2013. We had dinner with the 1963 team. Was it the 63 team where we won the All-Ireland? And those guys probably hadn't seen each other for 20, 30 years. Some of them, some of them had passed away. And they came into a room. We all sat around the table, and we talked about the old days and different characters and what was it like walking down the streets, and they won the All-Ireland. And just, that was about legacy. That was about building pride and putting a bit of meaning behind that crest. And so all these layers of behaviours, that was a conscious effort from the management team, from Pillar, from my time, even just the end of Tommy Lyons, I was involved briefly. Pillar, Pat, all layered different positive behaviours of professionalism and kind of passion for that crest. And Jim, as I said, we had foundation. I remember a graph that Pat Gilroy had of a stepping stones, and underneath, first pillar was always hard work, a foundation of hard work, and everything we did, and all management groups, Jim included, continued that trend, and we layered different behaviours over that. And the last one, I say, not the last one, I'm sure Desi is continuing to layer on behaviours that of the guys in a different type of environment at the moment. But last thing we did was, as I say, it was 2 weeks out from the final. And Jim was probably thinking about, what can we do here now? We can obviously go out and train, as you say, we can lift weights, we can kick balls over the bar. But it's all about looking for marginal gains and what's going to actually make a marginal difference, or more of a difference than doing something else. So us kicking the ball over the bar, where are we going to get any better? We'd already trained 125 times that year. We'd all got loads of touches on the ball. We all did our own personal sessions. We trained a couple of times a week on the weights, lifting weights. That wasn't going to do it for us. analysing the opposition. We were going to do that anyway. We'd already done a lot of that for the final. So Jim believed that just that connection piece, when you talk about that vulnerability, that of just getting under the bonnet about understanding each other a bit more, because some guys were only there a year or two. I've been there a long time, and we do these different activities at times to build connection. And that one was about just bringing the group, trying to bring the group together even a bit more. And just went away for the weekend, and we didn't do any. We kind of did yoga sessions, we did different things, but we had a couple of sessions where we just got to understand each other a bit more. We just spoke, just free, like offered the mic to different people, experiences, just facilitated conversations, and it went where it went in different directions. But for me, it was like, it just built that again, let's say, that culture piece. That what did it do? What was the marginal gain, I suppose, when you look back on it? It's that in the Kerry game, when we should have lost that game, the last 8 minutes, the last 5 minutes, we turned Kerry over 8 times. Could have won the game. We probably should have lost the game. We could have won the game in the first game. And was that anything to do with people knowing each other more? Who knows? But we fought hard that game, or the lads fought hard that game. I was watching on, and they dug deep and they fought for each other. And a fella made a mistake, and another fella came in and turned over the ball, and then a ball went wide, and they won the kick out again. And they continuously backed each other as a group and hunted in packs when they were knackered. You know what I mean? And Kerry couldn't get out of their half for 6 or 7 minutes. And that's, for me, you don't always see the byproduct, or the as you know from dealing with all sports throughout the last many years in Olympic sports, you don't always see the byproduct or the result. But for me, that was a tangible kind of metric that was given out. So that piece, yeah, it's about that connection piece being the real part. And then when you relate that back to business, what we try and do when you talk about middle managers is, how do you facilitate that conversation? How do you build trust? How do you get your managers to show vulnerability? Because that's where magic lies. That's when mistakes there's fewer mistakes are made. There's more innovation. There's better conversations, and that's what you want to get in an organization. It can be hard to do at scale across an organization. Obviously, something that we're trying to get after in PepTalk, but it's not easy, and you need buy-in, and you need to continue it, and it needs constant iterating and nudging. As we know, like any kind of cultural change or behavioral change, it does need that. As we had with Dublin, continuous repetition. As Jim would say, repetition. He'd say it 5 times, because that's what we did. We honed our skills by repetition. As any high performance team, look at the army. Why do they do the skills? Why do they march? Why do they do these things? It's sort of repetition, that when you come into chaos, have those preconceived executions in your mind that you can execute on.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? And connection is such an important word, and it's particularly interesting, I think, in, we hear so much talk about the snowflake generation, or Generation Zs, or whatever the hell, the millennials, whatever, and it's quite dismissive. And in the reality, it's just that these kids learn in a different way. Their relationships are different to the way our relationships were. And it just reminds me, kind of listening to you talking there about the way you guys came together, that, you've got guys who, were at the end of their career, and you've got guys who are just at the very beginning of their career. And there's a misconception in teams that teams have to be all mates. And sometimes I talk about caring as a leader all the time. I mentioned it earlier. And I think it is so important that people who report to you feel like you actually give about them, and that they will go the extra mile then because you care. But it's that kind of thing about, you don't have to be friends. Caring doesn't mean that you're all buddies and you all hang out together and you socialize together all the time. And I can pretty much guarantee over the course of your Dublin career, there's guys you played with that you probably didn't even like that much. But the fact is that when your backs are to the wall against Kerry in that first game, that regardless of personal relationships, because there's that sense of care and a connection, everybody cares about doing the right thing for their mate. And you know this, but we did an interview in PepTalk with Ben Ives. Ben is a 20-year Navy SEAL who's also the guy who runs the leadership training for the Navy SEALs now. Fascinating character. But he talked about when they were in really, really stressful situations and, life on the line stuff, that they knew the guys beside them had been through the same kind of misery and preparation and whatever. And because of that, there was that sense that they cared to get their friends. You know, there's this famous cliche about, you know, you never leave a man behind kind of thing. But they actually lived that because they cared about each other. When they finished their duty, when they went home, they may not even talk to each other. Like they might only be like 2 of the guys out of 5 might be mates, but they cared about each other in that moment. And it's translating that into the workplace. And it's something that I think is really interesting with your career. You've done an awful lot of, like, people maybe don't realize that you came back from your cruciate injury just before the end, just before the 5th All-Ireland, probably faster than anyone I've heard of coming back from a cruciate injury. But it was your second one, and you've been very good at it. Does the Chinese have the saying is the Chinese have the same word for crisis as opportunity. But you've kind of managed that twice in your career, where at the start of your career, you had a cruciate injury and you used it as an opportunity to improve as a player. And then you used it as an opportunity to get back and have difficult conversations with Jim. And maybe you could talk to me a little bit about that and your mindset overcoming over injury and having those conversations with your manager.
Yeah, like I'm kind of a glass half full type of a guy. And it was through experience, my first cruciate, that probably ingrained in my mind that mindset about when you're injured, it's an opportunity. I got injured when I was 18. I did my cruciate. I was a small, little, skinny whippet. I used that just because I was in a good environment with Dublin. I used it to lift weights, took a bit of a spurt of growth, and I came back a different animal. Like a couple of months out before my coming back, I did a load of kicking. I became really accurate, striking the ball. I was free taking. I was just different animal than I was going into it. And if I hadn't have done that, I would have trained alongside the guys. I would have done all the same stuff. And then, as you said, when I talk about marginal gains, I would have gotten better, but alongside the other guys. So when you want to stand out, I always say to people who get injured, I ask the odd time to speak to someone who's done a cruciate, obviously been there before, and they say, what can you work on? My last cruciate, I did a lot of visualization. I worked a lot on I talked to a couple of performance psychologists, and I was talking about like feeling those senses of the sport and smelling Crow Park and visualizing the ball going in, and even visualizing, like it sounds wacky, but visualizing the knee healing, visualizing the tendons coming together. You know, all this stuff when you're going. I was a sponge for that type of stuff. I love learning. I love just trying new things. But I suppose my experience that kind of gave me that mindset was that first cruciate, and I came out of a different animal. So because of that, I now had a mindset that this now always has to be an opportunity. I tore a groin then a couple of years later on my right hand, my right leg. So I kicked the ball with 3 months with my left foot. And my left foot, I think my left foot was more accurate striking the ball than my right foot, because I just love striking the ball on the run on my left. So I was running down the middle, I'm right footed, but if I was running straight at goal, I would turn onto my left and strike the ball on the run on my left, even though I would be more natural on my right. And just that was because of practice and experience, and obviously getting injured and having to practice. But so I always say that about how do you use crisis as an opportunity. So how would you take that bird's eye view? Because we're all on the hamster wheel, and business especially is around the hamster wheel. We're trying to do things, we're selling, we're innovating, trying to do things. COVID gave us a look, and PepTalk is COVID as a real opportunity, because obviously the people function has been real spotlight for Legacy as a marketing agency. And marketing dollars are the first things to turn off in the crisis, as we all know. So really tough time. A lot of sports sponsorship. Obviously, all sport was gone. A lot of consumer marketing, a lot of hospitality, PR, digital marketing, all turned off. Obviously, no one moving anywhere. So we have to really innovate, you know. And we sat down and we said, right, how are we going to innovate out of this and use this as an opportunity to come out better, as a better outfit. So we went away and innovated, and we're now going more deeper into digital. We're now we've acquired an SEO agency, search. We're now going to do, even for our current clients, we're going to do a better job, because we're going to bring them all the way through the sales, through the funnel, all the way to sales, not just brand awareness as we traditionally did in PR and storytelling, you know. So we became a much better company because of that crisis. Mass exodus from all organizations to digital. Everyone's selling, everyone's setting up an e-commerce site, and the world is going to be, the world of entrepreneurism is going to be massive, because the internet gives you that opportunity. And COVID, how many people are selling stuff out their garage, or if you're a corner shop, you're now doing deliveries. If you're coffee, you're now doing delivery. People have just been seeing this world that is actually so much bigger than it is through the internet. So that's where we're moving. And if we hadn't taken a look back, if we had just felt sorry for ourselves and kind of got rid of a lot of staff, we didn't. We knuckled down. We got great support. The government supports were great, so we kept on to most of our staff, and we innovated our way out of it. And we fought, and that's in the business world what I would have done in sport is like figured out a way of coming back better, working on the skills and coming back. And as you say, in my last year, I came back in 5.5 months from a cruise ship that usually takes a minimum of 6 months. I did it at 35, 4 years of age because time was running out. I had no choice. I remember working with James Allen, their physio, and you do these blocks of recovery. You do agility, and then you do a block of strength, and then you do a block of whatever different things. We were doing it in the one session of an hour up and out his back up in the Dublin Mountains. We do the 3 of them in one. So you do a bit of agility, you do a bit of hopping, then you'd be banging out the leg weights. Like it was like recovery on steroids type stuff. But I needed to do it because I was getting old and the year was finite. The All-Ireland final was coming. So but yeah, I think, sorry, the long-winded way of answering your question about using crisis or injury as an opportunity to come out better. And I'm sure loads of organisations as well as individuals use COVID to look at themselves. Perspective was given to a lot of people, and a lot of people have changed their careers, looking at things. So I'm hoping that people looked at it and will look back at it. Like I got to spend a lot of time with my twins, and babies growing up. They're 2.5 now. Got to see them at a really cool, interesting age where I would have been working 10 hours a day. You know what I mean? So the silver lining and everything. I know there's a lot of loss and tragedy, but I hope people were able to look back and will look back and say, you know what, I wouldn't have done this if that hadn't happened, or I wouldn't have known this.
One last question for you, Bernard, because I'm conscious of our time. You've summed up the last year really well, and the challenges and the opportunities and the crisis and the difficulties we've all faced. But one of the things that is probably pressing for every company right now is the fact that, going forward into the future, the likelihood is remote working is here to stay, and that we're going to end up in some sort of hybrid world where some of the workforce will be in the office, some won't. There's a whole conversation around replacing the water cooler moments, and it's, how do we shift that behavior towards creating a culture that isn't dependent on you being in the location?
Yeah, and I think, and you know this, I know you've a great view on this, but I think the research is saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that if we're probably a lot of us are going to be hybrid in a couple of days in the office, I think we need to operate as in fully remote. So if you think there's 3 people in a room on a call and there's 2 people on dialing in, that is very difficult, a dynamic as we've all lived in. We need to operate as if we're fully remote, even for diversity and inclusion. Are the people that are living in a different place because they have a skill set or a different location and they're dialing into a call? Are they getting the right inclusion in that opportunities and workplace, that you're my boss and I'm talking to you and I'm meeting you in the office 3 times a week? I get a better chance to impress you than the person who's dialing in to 3-hour calls with you each week. You know what I mean? So there's a big challenge for organizations about and then also I think freedom of when we work. If you have family, you work for a couple of hours in the morning, the middle of the day, the night time, understanding that it's going to be a challenge. And I suppose where we're a little bit that PepTalk are trying to get after is we still need to build community. We need to build purpose in our day and in our workplace. And we need to feel like we have relationships. And if we don't see each other as much anymore, we're hoping that PepTalk can fill that void in some way about that water cooler moment. Is that there's social, there's fun, it's gamification, there's enjoyment, and it's bringing that little bit of a relief back, with also the tools about well-being, but a little bit of relief back into that day, or a little bit of a break or a pause in that day that can help you be the best you can be, because it will be a different world we're living in. But I'm excited to see how it fares out.
Great stuff. I suppose finally, kind of for any of the people from outside Dublin, who's going to stop Dublin doing 7 in a row?
It's going to be a tough one. I'd say Kerry will be licking their wounds from last year, and Mayo unfortunately lost a few bodies in retirement, some great soldiers, but they won't be going away. And I think it'll be an interesting championship because everyone's thrown up in the air. There is opportunity for in crisis, there's always opportunity. Niall, you know that. I just spoke about 20 minutes.
Actually, quick one for you, and I'm probably going to get killed now because I'm way over time. But what's your thoughts on, with the COVID restrictions and all the kind of challenges of it? We probably won't have crowds back in the stadiums for the championship this year again. What's your position on Dublin playing all their home games in Croke Park?
Well, that's a job for Croke Park. That's a commercial call that Dublin, as Jim Gavin would say to us, we will play out your back garden and wear that Dublin jersey. So the Dublin players will play wherever they're put.
Nice one.
That's genuine.
Bernard, thanks a million, man.
Thanks a million, Niall. Good to chat.
Pleasure.